Really get a sense of how impressive Newgrange is, you need to look inside. There, past the ornate stone doorway, lies a narrow passage tunneling deep into the mound. After 19 dark and cramped meters, it opens out into a stone chamber.
When Ireland's mysterious moving stone door was finally opened, nobody was prepared for what came out. Dr. Siobhan Murphy had been studying Newgrange for 12 years before she noticed the crack. The 5,200-year-old passage tomb in County Meath had been excavated, measured, photographed, and analyzed by hundreds of archaeologists since the 1960s. Every stone had been cataloged. Every carving had been documented. But on March 15, 2024, Murphy saw something that made her stop breathing. One of the massive kerbstones, the decorated stones that ring the base of the burial mound, had moved. Not much, maybe half an inch. But in a structure built around 3,200 BC, with stones weighing several tons each, half an inch was impossible. The stone in question was Kerbstone 52, located on the northwest side of the monument. Unlike Kerbstone 1 at the entrance with its famous triple spiral carvings, K52 had always been one of the less remarkable stones. Its decorations were simpler, just some basic spirals and cup marks that looked rushed compared to the masterwork carvings elsewhere. Most archaeologists walked right past it. Murphy only noticed the movement because she'd been photographing every kerbstone for a digital preservation project. When she compared her 2024 photos to images from 2019, the gap between K52 and the stones on either side had widened. Something was pushing the stone outward. She reported it to the Office of Public Works, the government agency that manages Newgrange. They sent structural engineers who confirmed what Murphy had seen. Kerbstone 52 was moving. Ground-penetrating radar showed that the stone didn't sit on bedrock like the others. It rested on packed earth and smaller stones, almost like it had been placed there as an afterthought. The engineers recommended monitoring the stone but took no immediate action. These monuments shift over time, they said. Freeze-thaw cycles, soil settling, natural processes. They were nothing to worry about, but Murphy worried. She'd spent over a decade studying Neolithic construction techniques. The builders of Newgrange hadn't done anything as an afterthought. They'd transported 200,000 tons of stone using nothing but primitive tools. Hauled greywacke boulders 20 kilometers from Clogger Head, gathered sparkling white quartz from the Wicklow Mountains, and assembled everything with such precision that the corbelled ceiling inside the chamber had stayed watertight for 5,000 years. These people didn't make mistakes. If Kerbstone 52 was different from the others, there was a reason. Murphy got permission to excavate around the stone in November 2024. The dig started small, just a careful removal of soil and grass from the area immediately surrounding K52. Within days, they found something. Behind the kerbstone, hidden under centuries of accumulated dirt, was a second passage. This was not just a natural cavity, it was more like a structure built. It was carefully placed stones that formed a tunnel that sloped downward into the earth, running parallel to the main passage tomb, but separate from it. Nobody had known it was there. 5,000 years of archaeological study, and this passage had stayed hidden. The discovery made international news. Newgrange was already famous for its winter solstice alignment, the way sunlight enters through a roof box above the entrance and illuminates the inner chamber for exactly 17 minutes each December 21st. But a second passage suggested there was more to the site than anyone had understood. Murphy's team got funding to continue the excavation. By January 2025, they'd cleared enough soil to see that the hidden passage extended at least 15 meters into the hillside. And at the end of that passage was a door. This was not one of those merely symbolic doors or carved stones that were meant to represent an entrance to the afterlife. This was a real door. It was a massive slab of stone, perfectly balanced on a pivot point, designed to swing inward when pushed. The engineering required to create such a mechanism 5,000 years ago should have been impossible. Yet there it was, hidden behind Kerbstone 52, waiting. Murphy's team spent weeks debating what to do. Opening the door could damage whatever was behind it. But leaving it closed meant never knowing what the Neolithic builders had hidden inside their most sacred monument. And on February 18, 2025, they decided to push. 3 people entered the hidden passage that morning. Dr. Siobhan Murphy, Dr. Liam O'Connor from Trinity College Dublin, and Eowife Brennan, a specialist in Neolithic art. They wore protective suits because nobody knew what kind of air quality they'd find in a sealed chamber. They carried lights, cameras, and measuring equipment. The Office of Public Works had representatives watching from outside, along with a structural engineer who'd calculated that the passage was stable enough to enter safely. The stone door had been tested and confirmed to be balanced on a working pivot, though it took 4 people pushing together to get it to move. The passage behind the door descended at a gentle angle for about 10 meters before opening into a chamber. The chamber was smaller than the main burial room in Newgrange, maybe 3 meters across, with a corbelled ceiling that rose to a point about 2.5 meters high. But what stopped all 3 archaeologists in their tracks wasn't the chamber's size. It was what the chamber contained. They saw bones, hundreds of them, not scattered randomly like you'd expect in a burial chamber, but arranged in patterns on stone shelves carved into the walls. Human bones, sorted by type. All the skulls on one shelf, all the long bones on another. Ribs together, vertebrae together. The precision was disturbing. Someone had taken apart multiple bodies and organized the pieces like a collection. Carbon dating later confirmed the bones were contemporary with Newgrange's construction around 3200 BC, but the arrangement suggested a purpose that went beyond simple burial.
The mound of earth covers a rock passageway, which leads to a central chamber where the ashes and bones of the dead were placed.
It was not the work of panic or disease. Nothing about it looked rushed. Whoever placed those remains there had done it carefully, deliberately, almost methodically. Some of the skulls were positioned facing outward, as though they had been placed on display. The long bones were stacked in neat rows beside them. Even the smaller fragments had not been dumped carelessly. Every section of the chamber carried the same eerie sense of order. Archaeologists could not fully explain it. Ancient burial sites across Europe had revealed collective graves before, but this felt different, more controlled, more intentional. Newgrange was already an engineering mystery, a massive Stone Age monument built with astonishing precision thousands of years before the pyramids of Egypt. Yet deep inside its chambers, beyond the famous winter solstice alignment and the spiral carvings cut into stone, was evidence of something darker and something ritualistic. The deeper researchers looked, the stranger it became. Some of the remains showed signs that the bodies may have been exposed or partially processed before being placed inside the tomb. It raised uncomfortable questions about what the people who built Newgrange actually believed happened after death. This was not simply a place to lay the dead to rest. It may have been a place where the dead were transformed into something else entirely. In the center of the chamber sat a stone basin similar to the ones in the main Newgrange chamber. But instead of this basin to hold cremated remains, it contained objects. Carved stone balls like the ones found during earlier excavations. Bone pins with mushroom-shaped heads, polished pieces of quartz, and something nobody had ever found in a Neolithic Irish context before. Small clay tablets covered in markings that looked like writing. Writing shouldn't exist in Ireland in 3200 BC. The Irish didn't develop a written language until the Ogham script appeared almost 5,000 years later. These tablets predated Sumerian cuneiform. They predated Egyptian hieroglyphics. If the markings really were writing, they represented a level of cultural development that didn't fit anything archaeologists understood about Neolithic Ireland. Dr. O'Connor photographed everything while Murphy and Brennan examined the walls. The chamber's stones were covered in carvings, but not the familiar spirals and lozenges found throughout Newgrange. These carvings showed figures, humanoid shapes with elongated heads and too many fingers, creatures that looked like animals but with wrong proportions. And at the back of the chamber, covering the largest stone, was a map. At least that's what it looked like. Concentric circles with radiating lines, dots arranged in patterns that might have been stars, and what could have been a representation of the River Boyne winding through the valley. They spent 2 hours documenting everything before exiting to let other team members enter. Over the next week, specialists from multiple institutions examined the chamber and its contents. The clay tablets went to a linguistics expert who concluded the marks weren't random. They showed structure and repetition consistent with a writing system, though deciphering what they said would take years if it was even possible. The bones went to a forensic anthropologist who determined they came from at least 23 different individuals, ranging in age from children to elderly adults. None of them showed signs of violent death. They'd been buried carefully, then later exhumed and reorganized. The discovery generated huge excitement in the archaeological community. Papers were written, conferences were scheduled. Murphy became famous overnight, the archaeologist who'd found Newgrange's hidden chamber. But as she studied the photographs and read the preliminary reports, something bothered her. The chamber had been sealed for 5,000 years. Nobody had opened that stone door since the Neolithic builders closed it, yet the air inside hadn't been stale. The camera footage showed dust moving in currents like there was airflow, and when the structural engineer reviewed the chamber's design, he found something nobody had noticed during the initial exploration. The chamber had a second exit, a narrow shaft barely wide enough for a person to crawl through that angled upward through the hillside and emerged somewhere on the surface of the Newgrange mound. The shaft had been hidden during the archaeological work because it opened on the north side of the monument where excavation had been minimal. Someone could have used that shaft to enter or exit the chamber without anyone knowing. Murphy went to examine the shaft's exit point on March 10, 2025. She found fresh scratches on the stones around the opening, marks that hadn't been there in photographs from 2020. Someone had been using the shaft recently within the last few years, which meant the chamber hadn't been sealed at all. Someone had known about it, someone had been going in and out, and when Murphy's team opened the main stone door, they'd revealed something that person had been keeping secret. 3 days later, things got worse. One of the clay tablets went missing from the secured storage facility at Trinity College. Security cameras showed nothing. The tablet was there during the evening check, gone by morning. No alarms triggered, no doors were forced. It simply vanished. Then the incident started happening around Newgrange. Motion sensors placed inside the monument to detect unauthorized entry kept going off at night. Guards would rush in and find nothing, but the sensors had definitely detected movement inside the passage tomb, in areas where no one should have been. Locals reported seeing lights in the Newgrange mound after dark, moving through the stones like the walls were transparent. Farm animals near the site started behaving strangely, refusing to graze in fields adjacent to the monument. Murphy started receiving anonymous letters delivered to her university office, written by hand on blank paper. The letters warned her to stop the excavation. They said the chamber should have stayed sealed. They claimed the Neolithic builders had locked something away that wasn't supposed to come out. Murphy dismissed the first few letters as pranks from conspiracy theorists who'd read too much about ancient curses. But letter number 7 made her reconsider. It described the chamber's layout perfectly, every detail. The arrangement of the bones, the carvings on the walls, the stone basin, things that hadn't been published anywhere. Only the research team knew these details, and Murphy trusted every one of them. So either the letter writer was part of the team, or they'd been in the chamber before Murphy's team opened it, using the hidden shaft to access the space that supposedly hadn't been entered in 5,000 years. The letter ended with a sentence that Murphy would remember for the rest of her life. "You opened the door, so now you're responsible for what comes next." Dr. O'Connor made the connection on March 28, 2025. He'd been studying the map carved on the chamber's back wall, trying to understand what it represented. The concentric circles could be anything. The radiating lines could mean nothing. But the dots arranged in patterns kept bothering him. He'd seen similar patterns before in his research on prehistoric astronomy. On a hunch, he compared the dot pattern to star maps from 3200 BC, accounting for 5,000 years of stellar drift and changes in Earth's axial tilt.
And that means when the sun rose 3200 BC, the light would have actually reached across the floor and way back into the chamber there.
They matched. The dots showed the night sky visible from Newgrange on the winter solstice in 3200 BC, the exact moment when sunlight would have entered the main chamber through the roof box. But there was an addition, one dot that didn't correspond to any star. It was positioned between what would have been Orion and Taurus, in a spot where no bright star existed 5,000 years ago or exists now. O'Connor showed the map to an astronomer who confirmed there was nothing in that position. No star, no planet, and nothing, unless the Neolithic builders had seen something that wasn't supposed to be there, something that appeared in the sky on the winter solstice in 3200 BC and then disappeared. O'Connor started looking for astronomical records of unusual events around that time. Obviously, there were no written records from Ireland, but other civilizations were keeping track of the sky. Mesopotamian clay tablets mentioned unusual celestial events around 3200 BC. Chinese oracle bones from later periods referenced ancient stories about a light in the sky that came and went. Nothing definitive, but enough to suggest people across multiple continents had noticed something. Meanwhile, Murphy was dealing with more immediate problems. The missing clay tablet had shown up in photographs posted anonymously online. The person who took it had photographed it against what looked like the interior of Newgrange's main chamber, then posted the images to archaeology forums with cryptic captions about messages from the builders. Before anyone could trace the source, the posts were deleted, but not before hundreds of people had downloaded the photos and started analyzing the markings. An amateur code breaker claimed to have partially deciphered the tablet. According to his translation, which he posted to a conspiracy theory website, the markings described a door that opened when certain stars aligned, a chamber that held watchers who kept something contained, and a warning that the opening had to be controlled. Murphy dismissed the translation as fantasy. The person who posted it had no credentials in ancient languages and was working from low-resolution photos. But his interpretation spread anyway, getting picked up by paranormal websites and YouTube channels. The harassment got worse. Murphy started getting phone calls late at night from blocked numbers. Nobody spoke. They just played recordings of sounds, rhythmic tapping that reminded her of the patterns carved on the chamber walls. Her office was broken into, though nothing was stolen. Someone spray-painted spirals on her car, the triple spiral design from Curbstone 1 at Newgrange's entrance. The Office of Public Works increased security at the monument, installing additional cameras and hiring night guards. On April 15, 2025, the winter solstice chamber simulation happened. A researcher wanted to see if the hidden chamber had any special alignment like the main passage. Using computer modeling and the shaft's position, they calculated where light would enter if the shaft was open on the winter solstice. The answer surprised everyone. Light coming through the shaft on December 21st would hit the stone basin in the center of the chamber at exactly the moment when sunlight stopped illuminating the main chamber. The two spaces were designed to work together, creating a sequence where light moved from one sacred space to another. This suggested the hidden chamber wasn't just a burial vault, it was part of the monument's astronomical function. But what was it for? The bones, the tablets, the carvings, they had to mean something beyond decoration. Murphy started researching Neolithic beliefs about death and the afterlife. Irish mythology, though written down thousands of years later, talked about the Tuatha De Danann, supernatural people who lived in Ireland before the Celts. The myth said they eventually retreated into the burial mounds, the side where they lived in a parallel world. What if the myths preserved actual memories? What if the Neolithic builders hadn't just created a tomb but something else? A container for something they needed to keep separate from the living world. The chamber's design supported this interpretation. The careful arrangement of bones suggested ritual, not simple burial. The sealed door implied intentional isolation. And the shaft provided access for someone who needed to tend to whatever was being kept inside. Murphy returned to the anonymous letters. She read them again, looking for details she'd missed. Letter number 7 had mentioned what comes next. Letter number 9, received on April 20th, talked about a cycle that needed completion. Letter number 12, the most recent, stated that the winter solstice would matter, not past tense, future tense, as if something was going to happen in December 2025. The letters came from someone who believed the chamber had a purpose beyond archaeology, someone who thought opening the door had consequences. And whether Murphy believed in ancient curses or supernatural watchers, the practical reality was that someone out there knew more about Newgrange's hidden chamber than they should, and they were watching what Murphy's team did next. On May 3, 2025, Murphy held a press conference announcing the chamber would be resealed. She cited preservation concerns, the need to protect the artifacts and bones from environmental damage. But the real reason went unspoken. Too many strange things were happening. Too many questions had dangerous implications. The hidden chamber had stayed secret for 5,000 years for a reason, and maybe disturbing that secrecy had been a mistake. The stone door was closed on May 10, 2025. Curbstone 52 was reinforced and secured. The excavation site was filled in and replanted with grass. Within months, you couldn't tell anything had been disturbed. The clay tablets went into climate-controlled storage. The bones were reinterred in a modern facility. The photographs and measurements were archived, and life around Newgrange returned to normal. Except Murphy never stopped getting the letters. They came less frequently now, maybe once a month. They no longer warned her to stop the excavation. Instead, they thanked her for closing the door. They said the cycle could continue. They mentioned that December would show her the truth. when the light moved from the main chamber through the shaft into the space where the watchers maintained their vigil over something that needed to stay contained. Murphy didn't know what that meant. She wasn't sure she wanted to know. She'd opened Ireland's mysterious moving stone door and found answers that only created bigger questions. What came out of that chamber was knowledge. The understanding that the people who built Newgrange 5,000 years ago knew things that modern science still couldn't explain. They'd seen something in the sky that shouldn't have been there. They'd built a machine made of stone and light that served a purpose beyond memorializing the dead. And they'd left messages in a writing system nobody could read, warnings or instructions or pleas that would sit in storage facilities and museum archives waiting for someone to finally understand what they meant. The next winter solstice would happen soon. Murphy had already entered the lottery to be one of the few people allowed inside Newgrange to witness the sunrise illumination. If she won, she'd be there when light entered the main chamber. And if the letters were right, something would happen when that light completed its journey, moving from the ancient passage through the hidden shaft into the chamber that was now sealed again, locked away from the world, keeping whatever secret the Neolithic builders had protected for 5 millennia. She didn't know if she believed any of it, but she knew one thing for certain. The door had moved. Something had been inside, and now that she'd seen it, she couldn't pretend. Ancient stones and old bones were just relics of a dead past. They were messages from people who'd known something important enough to hide behind tons of rock and 5,000 years of silence. And whether Murphy liked it or not, she was now part of whatever came next. What do you think? Did Dr. Murphy uncover one of the greatest hidden secrets in human history? Or was Newgrange hiding something far more dangerous than anyone realized? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear them. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the following video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.